Think about this for a second. What if the most heavily sanctioned oil in the world could travel thousands of miles to its biggest buyer without needing a single naval escort, bypassing every single maritime choke point that was designed to stop it? Here's a question most people never really ask about global trade. How does a country like Iran, which is sitting on just immense wealth, but is also subject to, near total financial exclusion and maritime surveillance, how do they reliably sell their main resource to the world's most demanding buyer, which is China? Well, the answer, it's not on the ocean, it's on the rails. We're tracking a shipment. You could almost call it a political shipment, really. It's loaded onto a very specific type of rail car designed to carry just massive volumes of crude oil. This train is pulling out of a facility in Iran called the Apron Dry Port. Now, we will explain exactly what a dry port is a bit later, but for now, just understand this. This facility is inland. The moment this train starts its journey, it's already strategically secure. And this is a monumental haul. I mean, it's stacked with thousands upon thousands of barrels of Iranian crude. This cargo crosses deserts, vast steppes, plains. It traverses multiple national boundaries. And after remarkably fast, say 12 to 15 days, this shipment, which would otherwise be a huge target on the high seas, reaches China's border city in Xinjiang. And here is the core of our deep dive today. Throughout this entire 10,000-kilometer journey, that shipment moves with zero concern about intersection, zero interference from Western powers. No U.S. Navy patrol can touch it. No international court ruling can seize it. It's a land bridge that completely fundamentally rejects the traditional logic of global energy transport. And this new China-Iran railway corridor is altering how energy flows across Eurasia, and it's why the U.S. is reportedly extremely sensitive about its operational success. So our mission today is to understand, piece by strategic piece, how this steel spine is weakening the West's long-held dominance over global energy transportation. Before we go further, make sure to hit subscribe and support Geo9.
That phrase, extremely sensitive, it really does capture the gravity of this shift because for the last, 50, 60 years, the movement of energy, specifically oil and gas, has been the definitive chess game of global power. And importantly, the rules of that game were entirely set by two things, and really only two things: physical control of the sea lanes and financial control over the dollar.
Okay, so let's unpack that. The old game first. If the globe is a chessboard, the U.S. hasn't just been a powerful player. It's basically been the architect of the board itself.
Yeah.
How did that physical control work?
It was all about geographical leverage, which was maintained by military might. I mean, historically, any country that wanted to transport oil on a large scale, especially moving crude out of the massive reserves of the Middle East, had to navigate these critical waterways that were either controlled or, very heavily patrolled by the U.S. Navy and its allies. This whole system of control. It's often referred to as managing the maritime choke points.
Right, these are the narrow passages we always hear about in strategic discussions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so easy to forget just how critical they are to the entire global supply chain.
Exactly. And you should think of these choke points not just as geographical bottlenecks. They're strategic weapons, really, deployed by naval power. The system works in a sort of chain of vulnerability. First, you've got the Strait of Hormuz.
The big one.
The big one, right at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Roughly 20% of the world's petroleum moves through there every single day. It's right in Iran's backyard. Yet the U.S. Fifth Fleet maintains this massive presence nearby that ensures that any shipment leaving or entering the Gulf is under, let's say, intense scrutiny.
Okay, so if you manage to navigate Hormuz, you still have to deal with the next two major hurdles, especially if you're trying to get to Asia or Europe.
Precisely. If you're heading west towards Europe, you have to use the Suez Canal in Egypt. That's the critical shortcut between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. It saves weeks of shipping time around Africa. So control or even just influence over the Suez it's massive geopolitical power. You just have to look at the history of that region to see it.
And for China.
But for China, the absolute most critical bottleneck is the third point, the Strait of Malacca.
In Southeast Asia.
Right. It's that narrow passage that connects the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. Over half the world's maritime trade, including something like 80% of China's imported oil, has to funnel through this one passage. And Malacca, too, has always remained, you could say, under the shadow of U.S. military influence, often through security arrangements with regional partners.
That naval presence provides global stability for many, sure. But for a country that's seeking strategic autonomy, it's a profound chokehold. So if that's the military half of the control mechanism, the other half is the financial architecture, which is, you could argue, even more subtle and pervasive. The petrodollar system.
What's really fascinating here is that America's control over oil isn't just limited to physical sea routes, it extends into the digital ledger of global finance. It makes financial leverage a force multiplier for military control.
So for anyone who might be unfamiliar with the term, can you give us the breakdown of why the petrodollar system gives the U.S. such unique authority over the global oil trade?
The mechanism itself is actually quite simple, but its power is just immense. Essentially, after a series of geopolitical agreements back in the 1970s, nearly all global oil transactions, from Saudi oil sold to Japan to Russian oil sold to Germany, it all became priced and settled exclusively in US dollars. This created this constant, massive, and obligatory global demand for the dollar. Every major economy needs dollars simply to buy the energy it needs to function.
So even if the U.S. isn't physically involved in the transaction at all, the financial architecture itself forces global compliance?
It does. And this is where sanctions become weaponized. Because the oil transactions have to settle in dollars, they must pass through the U.S.-controlled financial system. Specifically, things like correspondent banking relationships or clearance mechanisms that are overseen by institutions that, respect U.S. Treasury regulations. This means that even if the U.S. isn't firing a shot or seizing a tanker, it can impose sanctions simply by denying access to dollar-based transactions.
It's like a financial jurisdiction that extends across the entire globe. You can't move the oil without moving the dollar, and if you move the dollar, you're subject to the rules of the U.S. Treasury.
Exactly. This ability to weaponize financial clearance is how the U.S. has been able to impose these crippling sanctions on countries like Iran for decades. It restricts their ability to sell their main resource oil by threatening to exclude any nation or company that deals with them from the entire global dollar financial system. So the petrodollar system has been this sort of invisible hand ensuring compliance with U.S. foreign policy, making maritime seizures almost secondary because the threat of financial exclusion is often far more devastating.
So, okay, we've established that for decades, to move massive amounts of oil across the globe, you had two non-negotiable requirements. You had to physically move it past U.S. naval patrol areas, and you had to settle the payment in the currency controlled by the U.S. Treasury. That sounds highly efficient for maintaining, global stability and U.S. dominance, but it's also an unavoidable point of critical pressure for a major oil buyer like China.
Absolutely. And that leads us directly into the massive impetus behind this new railway. It's this drive for diversification, and it's particularly driven by China's profound energy insecurity. Chinese strategists sometimes call it the Malacca trap.
Right. China is the world's largest oil importer. It's an industrial superpower. They import more than 550 million tons of crude oil every single year. Their economic engine just cannot function without continuous, massive, reliable energy input. They've reached a point where their overall dependence on imported crude is over 70%. That's a vulnerability that's unlike almost any other major power. And the data really shows the scale of the problem. The Middle East is China's most important region for oil imports. It accounts for, 44.26%, so nearly half of their total requirements.
Yet, as we just highlighted, about 80% of all that imported oil has to rely on those vulnerable maritime routes. The Strait of Malacca in particular represents an extreme, I'd say, existential risk for Beijing. If any unexpected disruption occurs along that route, whether it's a regional conflict, piracy, or a deliberate geopolitical blockade instigated by a rival, China's energy security faces major, potentially catastrophic risks that could immediately halt large sectors of its industrial output.
Yeah, if you're a strategic planner in Beijing, you look at that 80% dependence figure and you realize your entire industrial base is exposed to a single, narrow geographic point that's controlled by a competing superpower. That exposure creates just an unacceptable level of uncertainty.
And that uncertainty is amplified by the sheer volume we're talking about. When you're dealing with 550 million tons of oil annually, even a 2-week disruption, say from a Malacca closure or a major conflict in the South China Sea, that could lead to economic paralysis. Therefore, China's strategic solution has been decades in the making. It's this determined promotion of overland routes, primarily through the Belt and Road Initiative framework. The source material is very clear on this. Once a land-based energy transport solution is realized, it becomes the only option capable of bypassing those Western-controlled maritime choke points entirely. It's an investment in strategic freedom.
And that need for a strategic bypass, it dovetails perfectly with Iran's situation, with Iran's resource potential and its chronic constraints under sanctions. Iran is sitting on some of the largest proven hydrocarbon reserves in the world, yet its ability to monetize them at full capacity has been continually restricted.
The potential it's staggering. Iran is a true global heavyweight, just one that's been geographically constrained. Let's just look at the numbers for a second. Iran's oil reserves are estimated at about 157 billion barrels. That ranks them fifth globally. That's roughly 9% of the world's proven reserves. And if you add natural gas, their reserves hit 34 trillion cubic meters, which puts them second globally, only behind Russia.
And crucially, these resources aren't just vast. They're also efficient to extract.
Absolutely. That's an important geological detail that's often overlooked. These resources are mainly concentrated along the Persian Gulf Coast and in the southern Khuzestan region. The fields there have highly favorable geological conditions. We're talking shallow reservoirs, high-quality crude, which allows for highly efficient and low-cost extraction. It's a resource base that's designed for massive, profitable production.
But despite this geological bounty, that potential has been artificially constrained. It's been held back due to sanctions and U.S. policy, often backed up by naval deployments.
Correct. The U.S. naval presence, which extends from the Persian Gulf all the way through the Indian Ocean to the Strait of Malacca, continually controls the maritime arteries. This has imposed massive constraints on Iran's oil exports and resource development. The psychological and practical threat of interception is a daily reality for Iranian shipping companies.
And we have specific dramatic examples that really illustrate just how high the stakes are for Iran when they try to use the traditional sea routes. These aren't just, regulatory warnings. These are massive financial hits. Strategically speaking, we're talking about state-level piracy.
They are massive seizures designed to bleed Iran dry. Just consider the incident in February 2021. The U.S. seized an Iranian oil tanker off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. That single vessel was carrying nearly 2 million barrels of crude oil. And the U.S. didn't just seize the oil, they later sold the cargo itself, netting approximately $110 million.
$110 million. Gone from one ship. That's an immense punitive measure. Just destroys the profit margins of an entire supply chain.
And this policy has persisted. In April 2023, another tanker was seized. It was reportedly carrying over 980,000 barrels. Again, citing violations of unilateral sanctions. These actions are designed specifically to choke Iran's export revenue and enforce the sanctions regime by making maritime transport prohibitively risky. It undermines insurance and financing for any third party who might get involved.
This whole environment makes China's push for a secure land route not just an economic priority for China. It becomes an absolute strategic lifeline for Iran, offering kind of sanctions immunity. And before we dive into the mechanics of how they built this bypass, let's quickly define that key Iranian hub we mentioned earlier. What exactly is the Apron Dry Port?
That's a great point. We should clarify that. The Apron Dry Port, or the Apron Terminal, is Iran's primary inland logistics hub. It's located near Tehran. And crucially, it is a rail-to-road transshipment center. So unlike a seaport, which handles traditional maritime cargo, a dry port is an inland intermodal terminal. For the specific project, the Apron Dry Port acts as the origin point where the crude oil, which arrives from the southern Iranian fields via internal pipeline or rail, is consolidated and then loaded onto these specialized tanker rail cars destined for Central Asia and China. Its inland location makes the starting point of the journey instantly secure. It bypasses the immediate, highly surveilled coastal zones of the Persian Gulf.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have China demanding secure, diversified energy, and we have Iran demanding a sanctions-proof export channel for its vast resources, using a secure inland hub like the Apron Dry Port. The solution, this China-Iran railway corridor, required a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar strategic vision to overcome some serious logistical nightmares.
That's right. The Project Genesis, it really dates back to the very foundation of modern Eurasian connectivity. While the official Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, was proposed in 2013, the China-Iran Railway Project was incorporated almost immediately as an important westward extension of the foundational China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. The strategic goal was clear from the start: connect East Asia through Central Asia and into the Middle East with the ultimate goal of linking to Europe via Turkey.
But the project really solidified into a tangible reality, not through small-scale trade deals, but through the signing of that massive strategic agreement between the two nations. This was the pivotal policy decision.
Oh, the pivotal moment was absolutely January 2021. That's when China and Iran signed the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement. And this wasn't just a standard trade pact. It was a profound, deep strategic partnership designed to counter Western influence. And it explicitly named railway construction and deep infrastructure investment as one of the key areas of cooperation.
And the monetary value of this deal really underscores the seriousness of the commitment. This agreement is worth approximately $400 billion over 25 years. That's a nearly $500 billion commitment designed to permanently reshape Eurasia's infrastructure away from Western control.
And the exchange mechanism is highly sophisticated. So on Iran's side, they commit to supplying China with massive volumes of oil at preferential subsidized prices over the entire 25-year period. This guarantees China long-term supply stability and low acquisition costs.
And in return, China provides the structural foundational investment that Iran desperately needs, but just cannot secure anywhere else because of the sanctions.
Exactly. China invests heavily in essential infrastructure inside Iran. And we're talking about far more than just laying down new tracks. This investment covers roads, major port upgrades, new power generation, and, critically, digital infrastructure, like advanced telecommunications and 5G networks. This $400 billion is a structural investment. It's designed to create a permanent, non-Western aligned economic corridor, making Iran a modern, integrated trade hub that is fundamentally immune to isolation.
So moving from the policy agreement to the physical construction. Making this 10,000-kilometer route operational wasn't exactly straightforward. We're talking about crossing multiple nations and dealing with incompatible technical standards.
Oh, the technical challenges were immense. Geopolitics aside, the primary obstacle was the inconsistency of the track gauges across the different Central Asian republics. China uses one standard gauge. Iran and the former Soviet states like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, they use a broader gauge. This requires either expensive and time-consuming transshipment at the borders or the implementation of complex, specialized changing facilities.
So how is this solved to ensure a smooth, secure journey for high-volume energy shipments?
Well, the source material highlights the need for multiple rounds of high-level technical talks. These were between the railway authorities of China, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Iran. And the focus was on standardizing operating procedures, integrating the rolling stock, and investing in new border transfer infrastructure, capable of rapidly electing the trains to the different gauges. Standardization and efficiency were just paramount to make rail transport competitive with the sea.
And we can trace the progress through specific construction milestones that signal the final pieces were falling into place.
Yes, the completion dates are critical benchmarks in this long-term strategy. By June 2024, Iran successfully completed construction on the Rasht-Caspian Sea railway segment. This was crucial because it provided the necessary link to open the corridor with Turkmenistan, bypassing some internal Iranian bottlenecks. And then, just under a year later, by May 2025, the entire 10,000-kilometer China-Iran railway was officially completed and put into operation.
So we're looking at a finished route. It stretches over 10,000 kilometers, traverses Central Asia through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, and finally reaches Tehran and the Apron Dry Port. But the real proof of concept is the initial shipment success. That closed-loop system that proves two-way trade is viable.
The closed loop signifies the true strategic success. It's moving beyond political agreements into logistical reality. In the very first operational phase, a train loaded with Chinese-manufactured goods departed from Xi'an, and it successfully arrived at Iran's Apron Dry Port in just 15 days. That demonstrated the outbound efficiency for Chinese exports into the Middle East.
And the reverse journey is where the strategic payoff for China truly lies.
Exactly. Only half a month later, the same train was loaded with approximately 50,000 barrels of Iranian crude oil. It returned to China with the same rapid transit time, forming that seamless, secure, two-way transportation loop. This corridor is explicitly designed for both exports from China and sanctions-proof energy imports to China. The initial results confirm the viability. Within just 6 months of opening, Iran has successfully transported about 120,000 tons of crude oil to China through this corridor.
What this really means is that a logistical challenge that was previously deemed too complex, too expensive, or just too inefficient to ever supplant the maritime routes has now been solved. And it has immediate, profound impacts on speed, stability, and most importantly, on sanctions avoidance.
Speed is the most obvious, immediate benefit that challenges the traditional wisdom of global trade. We mentioned earlier that maritime transport previously took Iranian oil tankers a laborious 30 to 40 days to reach China. And that's navigating those choke points, paying high insurance premiums because of geopolitical risk.
And rail transportation just cuts that time dramatically. It takes only 15 days, sometimes even less. That's a massive reduction in delivery time. It improves market responsiveness. It reduces inventory costs. And critically, it shrinks the window of time that the commodity is exposed to international risk.
But stability is the strategic crown jewel here. And this is where rail definitively beats the sea for high-risk, high-priority cargo. Railway transport is far less affected by extreme weather, open sea risks, or piracy. This greater predictability and stability is paramount, especially when the commodity is the lifeblood of a nation's economy. The source material is very clear on this. Stability is sometimes considered far more important than the transportation cost, especially in the current geopolitical environment. If you are China and your entire industrial base depends on this oil, then the assurance of supply and strategic freedom trumps any marginal cost savings on a traditional tanker route.
If this perspective feels useful, take a second to subscribe to Geo9. It genuinely pushes me to keep bringing more research stories. Let's pivot to the benefits for Iran. For a nation that has struggled for years against these crippling sanctions designed to starve its oil revenue, this railway provides an essential, dedicated, and secure escape valve for its resources.
It provides complete diversification and security. It's a genuine alternative to the maritime routes. Iran gains an entirely new export channel that operates outside of controlled waters. It effectively neutralizes the risk of interception or seizure by the U.S. Navy. This is a game changer for their economic sovereignty. It shifts the dynamics of pressure completely.
And to understand the impact, you have to look at the economic reality Iran faces. Despite the severe sanctions regime, Iran's oil export revenue in 2024 still reached $67 billion. That's a staggering amount. And the reason they can achieve this is their singular focus on their largest customer, China.
China is Iran's anchor customer. They absorb about 89% of Iran's crude exports that year. Just think about that level of dependence. If China stopped buying, Iran's economy would collapse. But because China needs that supply stability, this strategic alignment creates a mutually reinforcing system. The land route, by removing the maritime vulnerability, fundamentally weakens America's ability to constrain Iran's exports. And it provides tangible, permanent support for diversifying their export channels away from those volatile sea lanes.
It effectively neuters the primary tool of Western coercion, the naval blockade. Previously the U.S. could threaten Iranian exports globally. Now, even if the U.S. completely seals off the Strait of Hormuz to Iranian tankers, the land bridge to China remains operational. It ensures a continuous, sanction-proof revenue stream. It changes the entire cost-benefit analysis of imposing sanctions. Now, let's look at the flip side, the benefits for China. Beyond the strategic freedom from the Strait of Malacca, what does this secured route mean for their long-term energy planning and their domestic industrial stability?
Well, first and foremost, China's reliance on the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, and the Strait of Malacca for this huge chunk of its energy needs is significantly reduced. That freedom from geopolitical entanglement, the removal of the Malacca trap, is a strategic asset that's almost impossible to price. And second, the mechanism established by the 25-year agreement guarantees them access to large quantities of low-cost oil from the Middle East, thanks to that preferential pricing clause Iran committed to.
And that guarantee of a stable price and stable supply is just as important as the stability of the transport itself.
It's vital. This arrangement locks in a reliable source of energy that is increasingly insulated from global price volatility and geopolitical manipulation. Furthermore, by accessing oil via land from Central Asia, China strengthens its economic and security ties with countries like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, which reinforces its entire western flank.
And China is already scaling up. While the initial operational results cited 120,000 tons over 6 months, which is a decent start, the ongoing monthly capacity is far higher, and the goals are ambitious.
Currently, Iran can transport about 600,000 tons of crude oil to China each month through the railway. To put that into context for you, a standard Suezmax oil tanker carries about 1 million barrels, which is roughly 130,000 to 150,000 tons. So the railway is already equivalent to bypassing 4 to 5 large oil tankers per month that would be traveling the vulnerable sea route.
That is a significant, measurable reduction in exposure, and the capacity plans are even more aggressive.
They are. The long-term goal established in that 25-year plan is to nearly double that capacity, increasing it to 1 million tons per month. When that happens, China will be obtaining high volumes of stable, low-cost oil from the Middle East, secured entirely by overland infrastructure. This arrangement is the physical, tangible realization of that $400 billion cooperation agreement and is rapidly accelerating the integration of energy and transportation that was outlined in that strategic partnership.
Now think about this. The China-Iran Railway is not just a single, isolated line connecting two countries. This 10,000-kilometer spine is designed to be the core component of a much larger vision for Eurasian integration. And it has immediate, significant expansion potential. This is about building a system, not just a line.
That's the key to understanding the geopolitical implications. The strength of this project relies heavily on the fact that Iran already has a relatively well-developed internal railway system. That facilitates seamless further connections beyond its borders. The immediate expansion opportunities point in two strategically vital directions.
Okay, let's start with the link to Europe, the Western connection.
That would be the Turkey link. Connecting the line through to Turkey would immediately integrate this corridor into the existing China-Europe Railway Express network. This offers a southern, potentially far more secure and stable route for high-value goods flowing between Asia and Europe. It would effectively bypass the often congested or politically sensitive northern routes that run through Russia. It makes the corridor a permanent east-west artery.
But the direction that truly accelerates the strategic shift in Asia is the link south, into Pakistan. This solves a problem that has bedeviled China's connectivity plans for a decade.
Precisely. For a long time, direct land transportation between China and Pakistan faced near insurmountable geographical challenges. I mean, the terrain separating them involves the Himalayas and the Karakoram Range. The required railway construction time and cost were astronomical. It led to major engineering challenges and perpetually low efficiency. The direct CPEC route, while symbolic, has always been operationally difficult for high-volume trade.
Right.
The Central Asia-Iran route acts as an ingenious strategic bypass. By going through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to Iran and then moving south from Iran into Pakistan, it completely avoids the high plateaus and difficult mountain passes between China and Pakistan. It effectively opens a highly efficient alternative land corridor, easing the long-standing difficulties in land transportation that the direct CPEC route has faced. It's a solution by strategic detour, leveraging the existing infrastructures of Central Asia and Iran.
This shows a rapid, concerted effort to not just build a bilateral line, but to rapidly form an entire new geopolitical bloc, one built on shared, sanctions-proof infrastructure and shared strategic interests. The momentum here is palpable.
And the pace is accelerating fast. Just look at the 2025 initiative, which happened shortly after the initial railway completion. On October 28, 2025, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan officially signed an agreement to join the China-led China-Pakistan-Iran Railway Initiative. This moves the project past just two key players and integrates three more nations that are critical to Central and South Asian trade.
And integrating Afghanistan and Uzbekistan is significant, because they provide depth, connectivity, and resource wealth to the entire network, ensuring that the land route is robust and multifaceted.
It is absolutely crucial. Uzbekistan provides vast natural gas and industrial capacity, while Afghanistan provides a key land link between Central and South Asia. This formal move establishes a China-Afghanistan-Pakistan-Iran railway cooperation mechanism, creating an efficient railway network that covers Central Asia, the Middle East, and South Asia. This isn't just about moving Iranian oil anymore. It's about structuring a new economic reality for over 2 billion people, one that is defined by infrastructural connections that largely exclude Western involvement.
And the target date for the full operation of this extended line is planned for 2028. We are talking about a massive geopolitical re-architecture happening within a single decade, driven entirely by the need for strategic security.
The clear signal being sent by this monumental infrastructure project is unmistakable. It goes far beyond cargo tariffs or efficiency reports. It is a statement of strategic autonomy.
It signals that the global system is fundamentally changing. The Western-led system, built on the dollar, sustained by sanctions and enforced via maritime routes, is collapsing in real time, at least as the default, non-negotiable mode of operation for major powers like China and resource-rich nations like Iran.
An entirely new parallel network centered on Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and South America is rapidly taking shape. And these infrastructural linkages, especially those designed specifically to be sanctions-proof, using non-dollar financing mechanisms tied to preferential resource pricing, they are the enduring tendons of that new system. They represent physical, permanent insurance against geopolitical pressure.
The final implication of all this operational success is staggering for global power dynamics. Once this land network is fully functional and extended to Pakistan and beyond, any geopolitical pressure the United States hoped to exert by controlling sea routes will become significantly less effective, or, as the source material starkly puts it, meaningless.
The ability to seize a shipment or choke a port, it just loses its coercive power when an alternative, equally viable and sovereign land route is available. This railway corridor is effectively a declaration of strategic independence by China and Iran, and it demonstrates that modern globalization can function perfectly well without the traditional Western gatekeepers.
So this deep dive into the China-Iran railway really proves that infrastructure is the new theater of geopolitical competition. We've tracked a physical shift from naval dependence and dollar control to land-based stability and strategic independence. The opening of this 10,000-kilometer railway is not merely an infrastructure story or a line on a map. It is a tangible manifestation of a profound, years-long shift in global economic gravity and geopolitical leverage. It's a physical route, secured by that massive $400 billion deal, designed specifically to bypass the traditional gatekeepers of global trade.
And this raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider. Historically, naval power and currency control were inseparable pillars of global dominance. Now that major energy flows are successfully rerouting via land infrastructure designed specifically to exclude the dollar financial framework and maritime interception, and prioritizing stability above all else. How much longer can the existing petrodollar system maintain its dominance when critical energy flows deliberately and permanently exclude it?
So how do you see it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join Geo9 so you don't miss the next insight.